Greetings, Anonymous Party members, and greetings also to those of you who are considering joining the movement. For those of you watching me for the first time, my name is Nick Borden, and this video is part of a long series of videos in my campaign for the office of President of the United States. There's a lot more to it than that, so if you are unfamiliar with the whole of the project I'm doing, I strongly recommend watching one of the introduction videos and possibly even some of the other early videos available on the website www.anonymousparty.org. In this video, I will be explaining how my religious views affect my politics. There will be a little bit of doctrine involved, but if you are sensitive to this type of language, I actually still encourage you to watch. Not because I wish to convert you to my way of thinking, but because I want to reassure you that you have nothing to fear from me, so long as you're at least reasonably fair in your aversion to all things religious. I have actually had quite a number of people voice concern over the fact that I am religious. And yes, I am religious. I was raised in a Christian home. My father has taught Bible studies for as long as I can remember, and in more recent years, even I myself have taught at Bible study a category of teaching called apologetics. This involves defending Christian positions against arguments that seek to disprove or discredit the Bible. And yes, this does mean that I'm a creationist. I believe that God created the entire universe, matter and all. I do not believe in evolution or the Big Bang. And I believe that there is sufficient evidence to disprove evolution and the Big Bang. Believe it or not, both are very easy to disprove. However, being a fair-minded person, I must also concede that there is no scientific proof for creation. There's a few things that, at least on the surface, appear to suggest creation, but nothing that definitely proves it. But there's just no credible evidence for any other theory either. So yes, there is still faith involved, but once you actually have facts, it still requires faith to believe the opposite as well. So I teach my church members, or the members of my church, it's not my church, but I teach the members of my church how to tear down the arguments of evolution, because it is often used as evidence against creation. But this is not really the topic of this video. I'm just kind of pointing out that I teach it to illustrate two things. First, that, yes, again, I am religious, but second, that I am versed in the tactics of fair debate. While I concede it is possible I could encounter and even use inaccurate information, I will never outright lie, or I will never lie in a debate to support my position. That's not fair debate. You don't win a debate like that. I'm not going to cheat at basketball any more than I'm going to cheat in a debate. You don't lie to prove your position. And anytime I catch somebody doing it, I'm going to call them out on it. Now, politicians are typically versed in a different style of debate than what I am, which I think actually gives me an edge, especially if the American people are watching the debate. But their style of debate involves changing the subject, promising things that can't or at least won't be delivered, and using big confusing words to provide an answer that, at least on the surface, sounds intelligent, until you actually get a chance to mentally sift through it, only to find that essentially it said absolutely nothing. Now, I'll tell you right now, you have my absolute 100% word that I will never, not once, ever dodge a question, so long as it at least has something to do with my campaign, my policies, or, if elected, the duties of president. If asked a overly personal question, I will answer it by addressing that I feel it's overly personal, or I will answer it to the level I feel appropriate. I may occasionally have to ask for clarification as to what is being asked, since during some debates, the debate leader, MC, whatever you want to call them, mediator, may try to trick you into giving an undesirable answer. So they may ask a question that's kind of ambiguous to get you to answer a question either the opposite of what you actually feel or just make you look stupid. But there may be even a time where I am asked a question for which I may not have an answer. I won't make anything up. I promise not to make anything up. But I may have to resort to admitting my lack of a response. I may actually have to say, I don't have an answer to that question, but I will promise to look into the issue and come up with an answer at a later date. Unless the question is just not needing one. Because sometimes people will ask you questions that there's not really any good reason to answer, or need an answer for. But moving on, like I mentioned earlier, some of you did voice concern that my religious beliefs may somehow affect my politics. Well, you were right in thinking that. A person's religious views should affect their politics. They absolutely should. But what I believe isn't what you may expect from the typical Christian. I don't think that politics should legislate religious views unless the religious views agree with the societal accepted norms. So, while I do believe the Bible is the inspired Word of God, and I do believe that He sent His Son Jesus to die on the cross to pay the penalty for sin, I do not think that God or Jesus in any way wanted us to force the rest of society to live the way that He wants us to live. Now, it is commonly understood that one of the underlying themes of the Bible is that God loves us. It's also understood that He wants us to love Him. Now, there is a big difference between obedience and love. Love often results in obedience, but that's voluntary, not forced in any way. But obedience can also be obtained through other means. Control. Control is the opposite of freedom. The more control there is, the less freedom there is. But there can still be freedom with obedience, so long as obedience is not obtained through control. Obedience obtained through love, admiration, or respect is obedience exercised freely. To illustrate my point, we can use the typical old-fashioned family structure of a working father and a stay-at-home mother. I know this isn't the way, maybe not even the majority of families exist nowadays, but at least everyone knows the structure, so bear with me. Let's actually take two such families. In the first family, the mother had the option of working outside the home, but she chose to stay home and take care of the kids. She cleans the house, folds the clothes, and cooks dinner because she loves her family. She knows that her husband would prefer to eat at 6, so she tries to have dinner ready about that time. If she doesn't, her husband doesn't get mad, he just helps fix dinner. She does the dishes after dinner, puts the kids to bed at 9, and will usually sit down with her husband to watch a movie or TV for a few minutes before going to bed. In the second family, the mother stays home, has dinner on the table at 6 every night, the kids in bed at 9, and all the laundry and dishes done by 10. She never fails to accomplish all this because she knows if she does not, then her husband will get physically abusive. The end result is the same in that dinner is served on time, the kids go to bed on time, the dishes and laundry are done daily. The result's obedience in both cases, an obedient wife. Both husbands want the same thing, but they go about different ways of getting it. Both have likely stated at some point how they would like things to go or when things should be done, but one gets what he wants because he enjoys the loving obedience of his wife, which is usually a result of how he treats her. The other gets what he wants through intimidation, which I suppose also is a result of how he treats her. God wants obedience out of love, but this can only come from those who love Him. So how does he get everyone else to behave how he wants us to behave? It's actually pretty simple. He doesn't. Those who love and worship God, he calls his children. Being a father myself, I will tell you that other people's children sometimes just plain irritate me. Just as I'm sure that those who don't believe in God probably irritate him sometimes. But you will not see me disciplining someone else's children, and neither will you see God trying to get those who are not his children to behave. So how does this translate into political positions? Well, there are a few categories There are a few categories where religion certainly holds an agreeable position on an issue. For example, the Bible said it is wrong to murder people. I don't think that there are many people out here who would want to make murder legal. It is a societal norm to accept the idea that murder is wrong, and since the main principle of my entire political platform is freedom, only things that go against freedom should be considered wrong. Murder, for example, robs a person of their freedom to ever do anything again. Therefore, it can and should be one of the few restrictions in place. There are also laws that exist simply to maintain order, not necessarily to control people, just to prevent chaos and confusion and unnecessary risk. Traffic laws definitely fall into this category. And while some speed limits may, in some specific areas, may not be reasonable or fair, the basic reasoning for having speed limits and traffic laws are definitely very reasonable. Just think of the number of accidents and how bad they would be if you were legally allowed to go 100 miles an hour through the alleys in New York, or if there were no stoplights. A New York or a Los Angeles without stoplights would be a death trap, or a gridlock far worse than anything that it already is. It'd be ridiculous. If theft were permitted, you'd have to protect everything yourself. No one would be able to get rich because they'd spend all their time protecting what little they had. The most you could possibly dream of is living to the age of 40. These laws exist to maintain order and allow some freedom. They're actually necessary. But then there's another category of laws. Most laws, I think, actually probably fit into this category. Laws that are not necessary. Does it incite chaos? Mass hysteria, as they say in Ghostbusters. If McDonald's is allowed to sell 40-ounce cups of Coca-Cola, does it take money from your pocket if Target is allowed to sell motorcycles? Does it cause me bodily harm if a TV station is allowed to broadcast commentary that insults my way of thinking, or even me? The answer to these questions is no. There are reasons for the laws that prevent these things from being done. But the reason is usually control. The reason for control is power, money, or a combination of the two. Personally, I would seek to eliminate as many unnecessary laws as possible. Most of these laws are, not most, but many of these laws are at the federal level, but many more are at the state, county, and city levels as well, and therefore would require many more elected officials to get rid of them. If elected president, there's really not a whole lot that I could do to get rid of them. There's a lot more that I could do to prevent more of them from being put into place, and you can bet your last dollar that that's exactly what I'd be looking out for, is ways to prevent more ridiculous laws from being passed. But this whole thing will be a lot of work, and me being elected president will not fix it all. But hopefully it may be the pebble that starts the avalanche. So what kind of laws would I eliminate? Well, some of these topics I will cover in much more detail in some of the later videos, but I'll try and give us somewhat summarized positions on them here. Start with gay marriage. Personally, I believe gay marriage and the gay lifestyle are wrong and usually harmful to the person or people involved in them. But I believe it is not the government's job to prevent this lifestyle from being chosen. But neither should they promote it. The government and any public education institution should teach absolutely nothing in regards to what constitutes a family. What constitutes a family is a belief-based issue, a faith-based issue, and therefore it should be left to those with the beliefs to teach it, the families. So, I'm also, however, against forcing pastors, priests, or other clergy to perform ceremonies to unite gay couples. If they want to perform these ceremonies, fine. That's their right. That's, they need to take that up with their church or their denomination, whatever. That's up to them. If they're forced to do it, this violates their freedom for their pursuit of happiness. It violates their freedom of religion, and additionally, many pastors, my own included, will not unite a couple, gay or straight, whom they believe do not belong together. Often this means that they will not unite a couple with differing religious views, such as a Catholic and a Protestant. I've seen them denied from both sides of the aisle. In fact, I heard of a couple in, I think, Indianapolis last year who was trying to get married. I think it was the husband was a Catholic and the wife was a Protestant, and they first attempted to go to the wife's church and have their pastor marry her, and he wouldn't do it because she was marrying a Catholic. So they went to the Catholic church and they talked to the priest, and the priest wouldn't do it because he was marrying a Protestant. So they had to actually have a justice of the peace do their wedding because neither one of their religious leaders or religious figures would perform the ceremony for them. So that is the right of the pastor to do. And in their defense, the Bible does say that we are not to be unequally yoked or paired with someone else. And that's exactly what marriage does. It pairs you with someone. And a team does not work well if its members are trying to go opposite directions. Now, a gay marriage doesn't necessarily unite people going in different directions, because if they're both gay, obviously, then they're not going to want to get married if they're not both gay. But they're not necessarily going in different directions, but it's still a non-biblical union. It's something that God doesn't condone. And so a pastor or priest, since they're called to be a servant of God and of their flock, which is their church, they shouldn't be required to do something that they believe is harmful to those people, even if those people want it. Just because they want to do something doesn't mean that they should be allowed, or doesn't mean that the priest should be forced to allow them to do it. Or at least forced to participate in allowing them to do it. Where was I? So to summarize, the government has no business defining what constitutes a marriage. Only in filing the marriages, like at the courthouse or whatever, for legal purposes. And no clergy should ever be forced to perform a wedding they do not agree with. The justice of the peace, however, I think that's at least something that should be definitely at least looked at. I'm of the opinion that a justice of the peace is someone who serves the people for what the people want to do, and if it's not really any different than the county clerk who's actually filing that. I think it's the clerk's office that files that, but whoever files that actual marriage license, they shouldn't be allowed to throw that out because they're against gay marriage, because it's their job to file those. They're not performing the ceremony, they're not contributing to it, they're just filing what has happened. They're documenting what has happened. So, moving on. Next topic, illegal drugs. Primary reason for making drugs illegal is to prevent criminal activity from happening. That's traditionally been the basic purpose for making most drugs illegal. The most notable exception to this is marijuana. Marijuana, I believe, unless my research has been incorrect, I believe was the first drug made illegal, unless of course you count prohibition of alcohol in the 20s, or pretty sure it was the 20s, but unless you count prohibition, but that was reversed obviously, but it was made illegal because originally from petitions from the textile industry, because hemp was becoming a competitive product. At the time, almost no one actually even smoked it, and criminal activity related to it was either non-existent or almost non-existent. Most of those who did smoke it did so because of its pain-killing properties, not because of its mental effects. And soon the medical field also began petitioning against hemp production, claiming that that cannabis was a dangerous medicine that people would get hurt using. And so it was eventually made illegal to protect the people from its effects. This after a claim that those using it were more likely to be involved in a crime. Now, I'm not saying the evidence didn't exist, but I wasn't able to find any evidence from that time frame that supported this claim. But even if it did exist, is it really possible to prevent a crime by making the steps leading to a crime also a crime? No. That only results in more crime. Why? Because some things leading up to a crime never actually result in the crime being committed. By making the steps leading to a crime, you're actually just increasing the number of people who are criminals. Let's just use an example of murder. Typically, those who commit murder start by establishing a motive. Usually, this involves hatred, sometimes even very well-deserved hatred. I'm not going to say that everyone who is murdered was completely innocent. Certainly there were people who were murdered who probably deserved the hatred that was being directed at them. Probably even, some of them even probably deserved to die. But justice and vigilantism, or murder, vengeance, they're not the right path to go down. But anyways, after the hatred, it progresses usually to daydreaming about murdering the person, then to planning, then to acquiring the tools to accomplish the murder, and then finally the actual murder itself. Now, if murder is often done with guns, then making the purchase of guns illegal will only accomplish two things. First, it encourages those doing the murders to choose different tools, say knives, explosives, strangulation devices, or just get more creative than that, whatever. It just encourages them to use something else. Second, it starts to turn those who are wanting to purchase guns for things other than murder, like hunting, sport shooting, or just collecting. Some people just collect guns and have never even shot one. I know people who just think it's just fascinating. I like looking at historic pieces of guns, or historic pieces, really I just like looking at historic pieces of just about anything, but you're turning the people who are wanting to buy those guns for anything else but murder into criminals as well. Now, that doesn't make any sense. Let's just assume for a second that if we had the technology to read minds, would it make any more sense to make daydreaming about murdering someone illegal? Heavens no. I have to imagine that the number of people who have daydreamed about murdering someone and the number of people who have actually murdered someone are drastically different numbers. So all we've really done is made more criminals by making it illegal to daydream about murdering someone. So what am I saying? Legalize all the drugs? Well, in a nutshell, actually yes, but it's not quite that simple. I'm not just going to say starting tomorrow everything's legal, because I think that's kind of foolish and harmful and would incite chaos. Now, I don't think that they ever should have been made illegal, but it's hard to, well, it's impossible to go back in time and change that, so your next issue is how to deal with re-legalizing them. So how would the legalization of drugs affect the general order of things? For example, it's also known that driving under the influence of marijuana, or even especially some of the harder drugs, it's generally not a good idea. I have heard some people argue that they can drive perfectly fine while high, and, well, they may even be correct in that claim, but I've also heard that claim from drunks, even some who have injured or even killed people while driving in that state. If nothing else, though, I think that there needs to be a valid and credible study done on how marijuana, or even some of the other drugs, some of them I don't think it's necessary, but like cocaine, for example, I'm pretty sure that being high on cocaine impairs your driving enough to not be a good idea. But a credible and valid study needs to be done on marijuana, at least, to determine whether or not and at what levels it should be accepted. Now, that's kind of hard to do with the drugs being flat out illegal. So, what I would propose, though, is first, before the legalization, that sobriety tests be developed that can gauge whether or not a person is fit to drive. Now, I know they do have some, but most of them have to do with alcohol, but what we would really be ideal is something as efficient as the breathalyzer is for checking alcohol consumption, even if it's like a little pinprick thing that does a spot blood check, or what. Hair follicle test wouldn't quite work because that just gauges whether or not you've used it in the last 30 or 60 days or whatever. But something that can actually spot check the levels of effects that are going on right that second. But these type of tests would need to be created for all drug types, but I'd definitely start with marijuana because it is by far the most popular drug, recreational drug, and I'm pretty sure at least the least harmful. And please note, I said least harmful. I do believe that marijuana is at least a little harmful, at least as far as recreational use goes. But I do believe also that it does have some beneficial medicinal uses. And like with gay marriage, just because I believe its recreational use is a bad idea does not at all mean that I believe that people should not be allowed to make that choice for themselves. But both as the tests are developed and as time passes, I think all drugs should be legalized. Criminal activity should be well defined. Non-drug criminal activity should be well defined, and only include end results, such as murder, rape, theft, assault, etc. But steps leading up to or towards those crimes should possibly be well noted if observed, and then used as either indicators for who to watch for, or for who to suspect when a crime has been committed, but they should not be crimes themselves. Now, I am in favor of legalizing all drugs, but not all at one time. I think that's a little foolhardy. I don't think that that's a good idea. Especially, doing them only one at a time, or at least one category at a time, is definitely the way to go. Because with some of them, I'm pretty sure marijuana will probably fit into this, but there will probably be at least a brief wave of extra consumption that wasn't going on before, with all these people who, now that it's legal, might want to try it. I'm sure that'll probably happen at least a little bit. But this will also result in some confusion during its transition into legality, because all these formerly illegitimate, illegal businesses now have to transition into legal businesses. And there will be at least a little bit of stuff that they'll have to learn. But that's another reason why I believe in massive deregulation, a simplification of the tax code, because there's no tax paperwork for them currently, which sadly is actually also a detriment. but I'm actually already kind of getting into that. But my reasoning for why to legalize all this has nothing whatsoever to do with any desire for me to use any of these drugs for myself or my family. I want nothing to do with them. The only one I'd even possibly consider for anything would be cannabis oil or something like that. I've heard plenty of studies where cannabis oil or other cannabis drugs have been useful in treating things like epilepsy or well, I know the real common one is not cataracts. Well, whatever it is. Slipped my mind for a moment there, but cannabis has been very useful in treating epilepsy and a few other things, but being illegal, you can't obviously use it without getting into trouble. So my reasoning though has primarily to do with two things. First, fiscal responsibility. The war on drugs costs us billions of dollars every year, and that's just to chase down the criminals. It costs billions more to keep those that are captured incarcerated. Think how much money we could save by not having to worry about the non-violent drug criminals. That would probably take a chunk off of a lot of, especially larger cities' debt. If they didn't have to, or at least their budgets, I guess. If they didn't have to spend that much money combating the drugs, their lives would be a lot easier. So, moving on though, the second reason, and in my opinion, probably the more important of the two reasons, is medical freedom. This is an area that I think the Founding Fathers had either overlooked or just thought would never be an issue. Maybe they thought no one would ever go that low, I don't know. But unfortunately, we live in an age where we do not have total medical freedom. Unfortunately, if you are thorough enough to do your own medical research, and you believe that you know the best treatment for something that ails you, in many cases your doctor may override what you wish and force you to undergo a treatment that you do not want. Even in some cases when there's no valid proof that the treatment that they're forcing you to undergo even works. But just because a person has received a certain education does not make them qualified to override your wishes. It doesn't make them qualified to make medical decisions for you without your consent, especially if you're conscious. I mean, if you're unconscious, then, well, somebody's got to make the decisions, and you're obviously not in any shape to do it, but neither should they be able to force you to put your children through treatments that you don't think are helpful for them. There's a big difference between negligence, recklessness, and intentionally causing harm to your children, and a wholehearted belief that what you are doing is best for your child. There are medical treatments out there that I would not want to subject myself to, let alone my wife or my children, especially with the knowledge that better working alternatives actually exist out there that are just not accepted by conventional medical practices. I'm thinking of cancer treatments in this one, but if you want to know a little more on that one, I've got a video already on cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. Look that up if you're interested and haven't seen it already. But back to the basic point of this video, my key position is actually just one simple word: freedom. Freedom with as few restrictions as are necessary to maintain order and the opportunity for progress. This is the freedom to pursue the American dream. A dream that many of us share is prosperity. We don't all define it the same way, but for most of us, it involves at least financial stability, if not also wealth. But this is hard to achieve when regulations keep the average person from starting a business if they desire. It's not easy to achieve when taxation takes so much of your money. It's not easy to achieve when welfare systems trap you into them to keep you from ever earning more than what you're capable of making. And it's hard to achieve when your business can be shut down for not complying with any one of the dozens of regulatory agencies. The only things that should be able to keep you from starting a business, if you wanted to, should be capital, competition, and competence. Now obviously you can't control whether or not there's competition, but you can control how to compete with it. You can control your own competence through studying, through research, all that. With the right motivation, enough knowledge, ability, and possibly persuasion, you should somehow be able to raise the capital to start a business. Some businesses don't need much, some need a lot more than others, but right now the system is designed to control people, to put them into a position where their only option is employment, to control competition for the bigger businesses. Now those of you who have watched me or read my posts on the anonymousparty.org web forum probably are aware that I am not outright against big business. What I am against, however, is government protection of big businesses, or any business, or even industry in general. Which is why I'm against needless regulation. Needless regulation exists only to control people. People who would otherwise be free. People who would otherwise exercise their power. The only power the government has is the power that we allow them to have, which is why we need to take that power back from them by demanding at every level of government that needless regulations be removed, and that if those in power refuse to remove those regulations, they should know that we will remove them. The government needs reminded that its power is derived from its people, and that we are those people.